Greetings, friends around the world. This is Dr. Bob Thiel for the Bible News Prophecy channel. I'd like to talk about the Vatican's recognition of the state of Palestine, what the Vatican's agenda might be, anti-Semitism, and what's going to go on with the Vatican in Europe and Jerusalem. Now, many of you may be aware that on May 13th, 2015, the Vatican essentially officially recognized the state of Palestine. Now, Palestine has not been considered a separate state, at least not officially by countries such as the United States. And although the Vatican has been referring to the Palestinian state since 2012, this seems to be the first official recognition. Well, some question that. I'd like to read something from a Vatican spokesman, a priest by the name of Federico Lombardi. He said, yes, it's a recognition that the state exists. So we see now official recognition by the Vatican of Palestinian state. Now, the Vatican is doing this for several reasons, one of which, I believe, is that it wants to be amongst the earlier nations, if you can call Vatican City a nation, to recognize Palestine, to give it more influence amongst the Palestinians, as well as on affairs going on in the Middle East. Now, there's various reasons that I believe this was done. One is to promote an interfaith agenda. Now, in June of 2014, Pope Francis had the Palestinian President Abbas, as well as the President of Israel, Shimon Peres, come to the Vatican for an interfaith prayer meeting, if you want to call it that. And in addition, while they were there a Lutheran head, as well as the ecumenical patriarch of Constantinople, representing the Eastern Orthodox. So it was truly an ecumenical interfaith meeting, prayer meeting, if you will, because Palestinians are Muslim, Shimon Peres is Jewish, and I mentioned the other Greco-Roman faiths who claim Christianity. Now, the second reason I believe that I want to go into a little more depth is that this interfaith meeting that I mentioned in June came shortly after Pope Francis had made a trip to Israel. Now, prior to him going there in May of 2014, for actually decades, the Vatican has been trying to negotiate with the nation of Israel to get certain properties from the state of Israel. Specifically, they want a building that's commonly referred to as the cenacle or cenaculum, also called the Church of God on Jerusalem's Western Hill. This appears to be the first church building, first Christian church building that was built in Jerusalem, and the Vatican wants it. Now, the people who originally built this particular building did not have Greco-Roman doctrines. They had more Judeo-Christian doctrines, and so they were not the same. But the Vatican has wanted that nonetheless. And back in 2014, what was reported was that the Vatican supposedly told Israel, look, if you do not give us this building, we are not going to support you the way you want to be supported. And so what happened was they didn't get the building. Now, Israel did a few things to try to give the Vatican more access to this building, but it didn't go as far as the Vatican wanted. And I believe that this is one of the reasons why the Vatican chose to recognize Israel the way it did in May of 2015. Well, what about anti-Semitism? Could that at all be involved here? Well, I'd like to read something from the Israeli National News. The Israel National News came out the next day, this is May 14, 2015, and said, for over 40 years after the Jewish state won its independence in 1948, the Vatican adopted a diplomatic policy of total non-recognition of Israel. Now, despite the acceptance by all Western nations, including at the beginning the communist bloc, the Vatican's recognition of Israel, according to this report, which I assume is correct, did not happen until 1993. Now, this is over 2 decades after Israel's foe, Egypt, signed a peace treaty with the state. And so the Israel National News finds this is odd, because the Vatican had diplomatic relations with over 130 states at the time, and it acknowledged their legitimacy, even though there were some border disputes. So, again, I'm reading from the Israel National News. Why such a different standard applied to Israel? Here's what it says. Because of anti-Semitism and aversion they felt upon seeing Israel again among the family of nations. For the Vatican, an independent Jewish state bearing the name Israel, with Jerusalem as its capital and a renewal of life in the land of the Bible, has been a problem and a, quote, a total contradiction to church dogma. And now, because of the same anti-Semitism, the Vatican has hurried to recognize the state of Palestine. This Trojan horse against the Jewish people, a tool to dismantle the state of Israel and support an entity that wants to get Israel cleansed from, all the Jews cleansed from that region. Now, Israel National News says, we note in shock Pope Francis's eagerness to recognize the state of Palestine before it's even arisen. Yet we recall the eagerness of another pope who recognized the Hitler regime just 4 months after it was established. So in Israel, some are believing that this recognition of the state of Palestine is anti-Semitic. And I'd like to read something from more of a Protestant source. This is the World News Daily. And it says, in an article related to all this, the diplomatic recognition of the State of Israel by the Vatican will open the door to a new wave of anti-Semitism and endanger millions of Israeli Jews and Arabs, charged several leading evangelicals who've written about this for decades. One is Joel Richardson, who's written various books. He slammed the decision as, quote, an act of profound hatred toward the Jewish people globally. In an interview with World News Daily, Richardson said, to the uninformed from the outside, recognizing Palestine might seem to be reasonable. Certainly, God of heaven loves the Palestinian people as much as a Jew. But, Richardson says, not to those who have a better grasp of the various political, religious, and security realities on the ground. None who are informed will deny the establishment of a Palestinian state will compromise the security of millions of Israeli Jews and Arabs in a profound way. There's also something from a pastor, Protestant pastor and author by the name of Carl Gallup. He says the impact of the Vatican's decision is going to be catastrophic. He says he's not surprised. He told World News Daily, this really should come as no huge shock to the world. Why? Because this Pope has made similar statements supporting the Palestinian cause. As far as I know, this is the first time he's called for a Palestinian state explicitly, however. And this is disturbing prophetically and geopolitically because it will fuel the current wave of anti-Semitism that is sweeping the globe. And we have seen anti-Semitism not only in Muslim countries, but in various European countries as well. And so it's been a factor there. Now, while I'm not convinced that the Vatican's recognition of this state of Palestine is necessarily of itself anti-Semitic, there long has been anti-Semitism in the Church of Rome. Throughout history, Church of Rome, Eastern Orthodox, and various Protestants, by the way, have made anti-Semitic statements and encouraged hatred of the Jews. Now, I think one of the reasons that this has been done is to discourage people from realizing that the true Christian church had more in common with Jews, or Judeo-Christians more specifically, than they would, for example, with the Church of Rome, the Church of Constantinople, if I could call it that, or the Greek Orthodox, or the various Protestant denominations. We've written a couple of booklets which are free, and I will link the same place that you found this particular video, giving you history about where the true church is today, where true Christian church is, as well as the true history or the continuing history of the Church of God. Why? Because if you are willing to look at these things and not let yourself be influenced by hatred toward Jews or anti-Semitism, you may be surprised, if you don't already know, truly the original Christian church had a lot of Judeo-Christian practices that the later Greco-Roman faiths denounced and wouldn't practice, even though Jesus did, his apostles did, and his early followers did, as these booklets help demonstrate. Scholars recognize that the original church in Jerusalem was led by circumcised Jews. The first approximately 15 bishops or pastors, if you will, of Jerusalem were circumcised Jews. So, and they went to church on Saturday, they kept the Sabbath, they kept the biblical holy days, they didn't eat unclean meats, and things such as that. And even Catholic writings say that these people were faithful, yet later the Greco-Roman churches changed. Now, one thing that's somewhat different between how we in the continuing Church of God view church history and a lot of the Greco-Romans view church history is what happened when somebody by the name of Emperor Constantine came to the scene. Now, I'd like to read something that's a little bit lengthy, so we'll put it up here for you to see it. But this is from the Edict of Milan in 313. So let me read this and I'll comment on it. When I, Constantine Augustus, as well as I, Licinius Augustus, fortunately met near Mediolorum, or Milan, and were considering everything that pertained to public welfare and security, we thought, among other things, which we saw would be good for the many, those regulations pertaining to the reverence of the deity ought certainly to be made first, so that we may grant to the Christians and others full authority to observe that which each religion preferred. Hence, any divinity whatsoever in the seat of heavens may be propitious and kindly disposed to us and all who are placed under our rule. And thus, by this wholesome counsel and most upright provision, we thought to arrange that no one should be denied the opportunity to give his heart for the observance of the Christian religion, of that religion that he should think best for himself. So the supreme deity to worship we freely yield our hearts may show in all things his usual favor and benevolence. Therefore, your worship should know that it has pleased us to remove all conditions whatsoever which were in rescripts formerly given to you officially concerning the Christians, and now any one of these who wishes to observe Christian religion may do so freely and openly, without molestation. We thought it fit to commend these things most fully to your care, that you may know that we have given to those Christians free and unrestricted opportunity of religious worship. When you see this, and it's been granted to them by us, your worship will know that we have conceded to other religions the right of open and free observance of their worship for the sake of peace at our times, that each one may have the free opportunity to worship as he pleases. This regulation is made so that we may not detract from the dignity of any dignity or any religion. Now that's fantastic. Emperor Constantine and the other emperor with him decided that they should have freedom of religion in the empire. They thought it would be best for the empire. They thought that would be a good thing. Now we in the Continuing Church of God think that's fine. The problem is Emperor Constantine changed his view less than 2 decades later. Did you know that? Well, many of the Greco-Roman faiths ignore that, or they actually like the fact that he came out with another edict. He came up with something called the Edict Against Heretics. And I'm going to read just a little bit of it first. It says, Victor Constantius, Maximus Augustus to the heretics, understand now by this present statute, you Novatians, Valentinians, Marcionites, Paulians, ye who are called Cataphrygians, and all ye who devise and support heresies by means of your private assemblies. So, he's talking about different ones. Now remember, this is the same person, before I read the next part, and we're going to put the next part up for you to see. This is the same person who said, any religion, you can do it. You can do it the way you believe. Well, notice what he did. Forasmuch then, it is no longer possible to bear with your pernicious errors, we give warning by this present statute that none of you henceforth presume to assemble yourselves together. We have directed accordingly that you be deprived of all the houses in which you are accustomed to hold your assemblies, and our care in this respect extends so far as to forbid the holding of your superstitious and senseless meetings, not in public merely, but in any private house or place whatsoever. And in order that this remedy might be applied with effectual power, we have commanded, as before said, that you may be positively deprived of every gathering point for your superstitious meetings, I mean all the houses of prayer, if such be worthy of the name, which belongs to the heretics, and that they may made over without delay to the Catholic Church, that any other places be confiscated to the public service, and no facility whatever be left for any future gathering, in order that from that day forward none of your unlawful assemblies may presume to appear in any public or private place. Let this edict be made public. Now, when Constantine did this, some of the people he was referring to were Church of God Christians who had Judeo-Christian practices. Furthermore, that building I mentioned, this cenacle, or the Church of God in Jerusalem's Western Hill, was one of the buildings that ended up being confiscated by the Church of Rome and taken from the Christians in Jerusalem. You say, well, what's this got to do with anti-Semitism? It's just all about heresies. Well, I'm going to read something from Eusebius' Life of Constantine, Book 3, Chapter 18. Now, this is in the 4th century, and this is when something that the sun god worshipping Emperor Constantine said concerning the date of Passover. Quote, "Let us then have nothing in common with the detestable Jewish crowd who received from our Savior a different way." Detestable Jewish crowd? Jesus didn't say the Jews were detestable. Jesus was a Jew. Jesus kept Passover on the 14th of Nisan, but this particular emperor decided it should be on a Sunday. He was a sun god worshiper, and that's what he liked. Now, it wasn't just Emperor Constantine who had these particular views. Various Orthodox writers have taken positions against those who hold Judeo-Christian practices. For example, there was in 1249 AD, there was a vision by the so-called Blessed Hieronymus Agathelios. He claimed that, quote, "the blasphemies of the Sabbateans have stained and soiled for many centuries." In other words, he was saying people who keep Saturday, the same day Jesus kept, were blaspheming. And it's because of this hatred toward those who keep original Christian practices that I believe that Satan has encouraged anti-Semitism throughout religions that claim to be Christian. For example, there's a council of Albi in 1254 that said about the Albigensians, "They savor of Judaism. They observe the Jewish Sabbath, but they say that the holy Dominical day, in other words Sunday, is no better than any other day. Let them be accursed." Now, I'd like to read something from a former Roman priest, Catholic priest. He said, some had said that the persecution under Emperor Diocletian, where 2,000 Christians perished, was horrid, or the most savage. He said, but in the first incident of Pope Innocent's crusade, 10 times that number of people were slaughtered. And not all were Albigensians. It comes as a shock to discover that at a stroke, a pope killed far more Christians than Diocletian. Now, I don't know the exact number of real Christians in all those, but the reality is, yes, the popes have done things that have killed Christians. Now, Greco-Roman leaders have long considered those of us with a Church of God background to be secret Jews. Now, I'd like to read a writing by somebody with a pen name, Maurice Pinay, who had connection with the Vatican. Some people actually think it was a pope writing under that, and I don't know that or not. But let me read something from a book that some Catholics still recommend that people read. It said, "In the Middle Ages, the popes and the councils were successful in destroying the Jewish revolutionary movements which appeared within Christianity in the form of the false teaching and which were introduced by those who were Christians in appearance but Jews in secret. The latter then recruited upright and good Christians for the arising heretical movement by persuading the crowd, the latter in a crafty way. The secret Jews organized and controlled in a secret manner the movements which were creative in the driving force of wicked false teachings, such as those as iconoclasts." Iconoclasts? What are those? Those are people who are against idols. So the complaint is that some of these Judeo-Christians were really Jews because they were against idols. Well, no, the Bible's against idols. The Apostle John concluded one of his letters, "Little children, keep yourself from idols, amen." Yet they're saying, no, these are Jews. No, these are Christians read that way. The Cathars, the original Puritans, the Patrines, Albigenses, and others. Now, of course, you say, wait a second. A lot of Protestants and Catholics have made positive statements toward Jews and are not anti-Semitic. True. Great. Fantastic. And many evangelicals are supportive of the Jews. That's fine. And let me read something here. This came from May 11th of 2015. The Catholic Protestant churches in Austria have apologized for their anti-Semitism during and prior to the Holocaust. And it says the Catholic Church must acknowledge its share of responsibility for creation of the climate of disdain and hatred for Jews before Hitler arose, and the lack of pity and solidarity with their Jewish fellow citizens during the Holocaust, said Cardinal Christoph Schorborn. And then the Austrian Protestant Council of Churches expressed particular shame for the complicity against the Jews and other groups that were considered, quote, unfit to live. I'm not going to dwell on the Protestant side of it, but I will comment that they get this unfit to live comment, the Protestants did, from their reformer, Martin Luther. The reality is, in my view, promoting anti-Semitism gets people not to do what this book says, not be willing to look at the truth about early church history and where the true Christian church is today. Now, on May 16th, 2015, Pope Francis referred to Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas as an angel of peace. He made the compliment during an exchange of gifts at the end of an official audience in the Apostolic Palace. He presented Abbas with a medallion and explained that represented the angel of peace destroying the bad spirit of war. The Pope said he thought the gift was appropriate, said, quote, "You are an angel of peace." Then Abbas, Palestinian president, offered Francis relics of two saints, or two Palestinians the Catholics were making saints. Now, relics, by the way, are usually or often objects of idolatry. So the Palestinian president gave Pope something that I think would be idolatrous because of how it's going to be used, and the Pope calls him an angel of peace. It says, and then church officials are holding up the new saints as a sign of hope and encouragement for Christians in the Middle East. Now, as far as Abbas goes, President Abbas, is he an angel of peace? Well, he's not considered to be. Back in 2014, Abbas, who's frequently considered to be a moderate Palestinian, endorsed the acts of Mutez Hijaz, an Islamic jihad terrorist who attempted to murder Rabbi Glick, and was later shot by security forces as they arrested him. Abbas praised him as a defender of Palestinian rights and expressed rage that he got killed when he was going to try to assassinate somebody. Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, slammed Abbas for the letter, saying Abbas, was responsible for the continuing wave of violence going over there, and others in Israel came up to the same conclusion. Now, Abbas is not always popular, even amongst Palestinians. Hamas does not consider that Abbas is the legitimate leader. He didn't really win a particular election at a certain point in time, and so they don't right to recognize him, plus they don't agree with his policies. Yet, Pope Francis keeps working with him and promoting it as part of his interfaith dialogue and his plan for some type of peace over there. Now, a lot of people are going to think what the Pope is doing. But in 2 Corinthians chapter 11, to read a scripture, read this here. It says, "For Satan himself transfers himself into an angel of light. Therefore, it's no great thing if his ministers also transform themselves into ministers of righteousness, whose end will be according to their works." I don't believe that Palestinian President Abbas is an angel of peace. I don't believe that the Pontiff is an angel of light. And the Bible also has a warning in Revelation 13, verse 11. It says, "Then I saw a dragon come out of the earth. He had two horns like a lamb, and he spoke like a dragon." Pope Francis has a message that's very popular in the media. They think it's a righteous message from time to time, and they agree with his interfaith message, but the Bible does not say that will turn out well if you look at Revelation, say 17 or Revelation 18. Now, the reality is that the Vatican does want to wrest control of Jerusalem away from the Jews. And the problem is, at some point in time, because of all the terrorist issues and regional issues over there, we're going to see a time coming when there will be some type of a peace deal in the Middle East. Now you can read about this in Daniel 9, 26 and 27. I'm not going to go through all that, but this basically talks about a European power that's going to come and make a deal that this European power will break. And it's going to involve Jerusalem. As far as the deal being broken, I'll read Daniel 11:31. It says, forces are going to be mustered by him. He's going to defile the sanctuary fortresses and take away the daily sacrifices and place there the abomination of desolation. Now that him is the final king of the north. That's a European power. And he's going to make a deal and be in cahoots with some power from the city of Seven Hills. Now I'd like you to go see some of the words of Jesus as far as Jerusalem goes. Let's go to Luke chapter 21. I'm going to start reading in verse 20. But when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know its desolation is near. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains, let those who are in the midst of her depart, and let not those who are in the country enter her. For these are the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled. But woe to those who are pregnant, those who are nursing babies in those days, for there will be great distress in the land and wrath upon the people. They shall fall by the edge of the sword and be led away captive until all nations. And Jerusalem will be trampled by the Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles is fulfilled. Now notice that Luke chapter 21 said Jerusalem's going to be surrounded by armies, plural, more than one army. I believe that working toward peace the way the Vatican is doing so is going to ultimately result in Jerusalem being surrounded by armies. The Vatican's recognition of the Palestinian state may be a factor in the multinational European army and perhaps other international armies coming there in the future that Jesus said was a sign to be concerned about. Now, I'd like to read something else that World News Daily had related to the Vatican's recognition. This time, there's an evangelical they're referring to by the name of Tom Horn, who said, the Vatican never intended Jerusalem to be one state. Rome ostensibly pleads the case of Palestinians and Catholics who want to make the pilgrimage. But in truth, there's a wealth of evidence that the Vatican wants to possess Jerusalem as its own. Even more, there are high-level Jewish officials waiting in the wings to hand it over. And I know that's the case. There are some who believe that'll be their best way to peace. Now, I probably should point out that not even all Catholic writers think this is a good idea. I'd like to read something from a priest by the name of Sylvester Berry, and this was published in 1920. He wrote, the two horns denote a twofold authority, both spiritual and temporal, as indicated by the resemblance of a lamb, and he's referring to what I was alluding to in Revelation chapter 13, verse 11. The prophet will probably set himself up in Rome as a sort of anti-pope. Antichrist will establish himself in Jerusalem with his lying wonders. And that Catholic belief, or at least by this Catholic priest, is consistent with what's going on, or some things that the Bible say is going to happen. Now, the recognition of the Palestinian state by the Vatican, in my view, is another step toward the Vatican's goal of being able to dominate the portion of Jerusalem that it wants to get control. Now, whether or not anti-Semitism was part of the reason for the Vatican's recognition of the state of Palestine, or calling Palestine a state, the reality is that Rome wants Jerusalem. The Vatican has wanted Jerusalem throughout history. That was the reason for the Crusades, was to wrest the city of the Holy City, if you will, from the Muslims. So I don't believe the Vatican wants to give it back. I just believe that politically the Vatican thinks this is the way to proceed at this stage, so ultimately they can get what they want. Now, Bible prophecy tells about a time when there's a power that's going to be connected to Rome that's going to end up with war and problems over in Jerusalem. While many people think what Pope Francis is doing is going to lead to peace, and the time will come where there will be a temporary peace deal in the Middle East, understand that according to Bible prophecy, that deal will be broken, disaster will come to the region, and the Bible does not say that prior to the return of Jesus Christ and establish his kingdom on this planet, that the church is going to control properly control Jerusalem. It does warn of a European power that will do so. I believe that the Vatican's recognition of the so-called State of Palestine, calling President Mahmoud Abbas an angel of peace, and taking other such steps is part of the Vatican's plan to get Jerusalem to ultimately be something it will be in, something that the Bible warns against. This is Dr. Bob Thiel for the Bible News Prophecy Channel.